reward that existed before this.
The charts have clearly changed, and gaming, absolutely. Gaming, health and wellness, ed tech, e-commerce, these clearly have been leaders through this period. But, in terms of the quantum of spending, Naveen, and everyone is dealing with cost implications, with cost constraints, rationalizing budgets. What is that going to mean in terms of spends going forward? What are you picking up?
So there are two ways one has to think about this. One is there is overall spending of advertising dollars, and then you have to see, while the overall spending of the advertising dollars have come down, what's the shift that's happened in the digital space? So if you take the overall pie has come down, but the digital nature of the pie has actually gone up quite a lot. Like, for example, I would be surprised if there are people who are still doing out of home, out of home advertising.
Yeah,
right?
there's nobody. If people are locked down, there's no point in doing out of home advertising, is there?
Exactly, right. So that's one example which an industry should literally be at zero, but those dollars may not completely come back, but a portion of it would add to the digital pie. Similarly, because one of the big areas of advertising on television was live programs, and given any kind of sport is basically off the table for the next foreseeable future, a lot of that spending went down on television, but came back in the digital space. So if you take these big buckets of dollars at the overall level, the dollars come down, but the digital pie has actually gone up. But as I said, the companies which are actually, whose business models are digital first business models, they are the ones who are actually coming out. And by the way, anecdotally, I know that those companies are getting very strong ROIs from their businesses, because this is the exact time, like it's like there's always an opportunity in between a crisis and in this crisis, but there's huge opportunity for a lot of these companies, including ours, by the way. Like, for example, even for us in the advertising space, there, such a massive shift from offline to digital would not have happened naturally. These very different times essentially lead to this kind of a shift that makes the businesses move differently. And so we ourselves had to kind of go back to the drawing board and look at what kind of products we need to make, what kind of programs we need to create in order to cater to a very different clientele, whose requirements are slightly different from the requirements of the clientele that was our primary sector before this.
So let me then address that last point that you raised, Naveen. What is it that you're going to be focusing on, given the opportunities that you see in the marketplace? What are you gearing up for in terms of products, etc.? And you've got there's within the group about 3 different verticals that you're dealing with at this point in time. What's your own sense in terms of being able to keep people? There is a fair degree of pain across various companies, and of course the startup ecosystem is not immune to that as well. So how are you coping with this?
We kind of thought through this as soon as kind of COVID hit. And there are 3 ways in which we kind of looked at what we should do in terms of contribution towards these times. One is, we obviously thought about what, as a business, and we are a fairly large company, what we should do to try and service to our society. And in that place, for example, we leveraged Glance, which is now one of the largest, consumer properties out there in India, touching close to about 100 million daily active users. We have now, for the last 60 to 75 days, we have every day sent information messages around safety, around things that one needs to take care of, alert messages to consumers, and close to 100 million of those people are consuming that content on a daily basis, and hopefully gaining from it. We ran programs around the Prime Minister's donation program, and we drove a lot of people and generated a lot of funds for them. And so we kind of used a lot of the assets that we have to essentially create these kind of things. And similarly across the globe, by the way, we used our consumer intelligence platform, which is called True Factor. We used that platform to essentially provide research firms, institutions, governments, intelligence pro bono in order to essentially help them predict what the coronavirus, where could it hit more, what actions do they need to take, because a lot of these problems, if you're actually not out on the road, the only way you can solve for them
Yeah.
is through building, very rapid artificial intelligence models to essentially predict what could happen. So institutions across the world have had access to our intelligence, and are leveraging that to essentially come up with hopefully better solutions and saving lives. And so we feel we are doing our bit, not just in India, across the globe,
Yeah.
in our contribution to trying to make sure that society is safer, and we do our bit on that front, at least.
So no rescaling of operations, whether in India or in the 7 countries that you operate in, as far as InMobi, for the marketing side of the business is concerned, no restructuring of any kind at this point in time?
The restructuring was only to essentially focus from one area to the other area in the large parts. We refocused our business to say, look, the certain sectors are not the ones, so we will change and go and deploy most of our resources in other areas. We did take voluntary, a reduction in compensation. Management took much harder cuts on compensation. Founders basically went down to zero. But we replaced that, whatever compensation reduction we did, replaced that with equity-centric compensation that we gave to people. And the idea was very simple, to say, look, these are times where we need to think long-term and not short-term about our enterprise, what value we are creating. And so therefore, we should, instead of trying to, cut down the cost by getting rid of people, we should all distribute the pain amongst all of ourselves, so that we can save as many people and not actually have to, not have the business take hit. Now, and these decisions were made, just at the beginning of when coronavirus was hitting.
Right.
And it was very hard to essentially know where the world would be. Even today, it's very hard, but we still have some more semblance of what the world would look like. So therefore, our policy, our criteria was very simple, is to say, we will go deep and hopefully it'll be temporary. But if we didn't do that, then you might have had to make certain decisions that would have to be, more permanent. But I think collectively as a company, and I pay them a lot of regard for the way maturely everyone in the company essentially took these decisions, to effectively take the pain somewhat across the board, so as to, safeguard the pain of few, which could have been, more brutal.
Well, that is, of course, part of good leadership. Naveen, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on Young Turks to take us through what life is like at InMobi at this point in time, how you're coping with the COVID times, and what the outlook is for mobile advertising as we move forward. Always a pleasure. Wish you the very best of luck. We'll take a break, but don't go anywhere, because when we return, the government has cleared key agricultural reforms, freeing farmers from mandis. After the break, we analyze the opportunity of India's agri reform with the founders of